So please allow me to introduce myself. You recognize those lines? It's an age thing. My name's Deb Holliday, not to be confused with Deb Houlihan. Okay, she is another wonderful master gardener who's going to be doing some speaking here on vegetable gardening along with Carol Crank. But she's a wonderful, wonderful presenter, really loves pollinating and butterflies and the whole deal. So, but I'm Deb Holliday, and as you can see here, I'm originally from Chicago. No booze? Family company. My little sister lives. At this time of the year, you probably would rather be in Chicago because the weather is more mild, right? Anyway, I've been in Texas since 1987. And even though my friends from Illinois and California said, "What's a girl like you doing in Texas?" I said, "I like it here. Really, the changing of the seasons is very subtle. There's a lot to enjoy. And besides, who can complain about being on the Gulf Coast or these wonderful saline bays for fishing and the boating and just beach going?" Anyway, when I was in Brownsville, which is where I landed in '87. I was working with Texas Southmost College and the University of Texas at Brownsville as a continuing education coordinator and a computer instructor. And I also worked with the Chambers of Commerce and all of the other public institutions to try and do classes like hospitality on South Padre Island or ESL for the workers in our area who didn't have good command of English. And also with some workforce training things. I really liked Corpus Christi the first couple of times I came here, and I still like it. So when my husband and I were getting ready to retire, we found just the perfect home in an old neighborhood on the north side. Are we considered north side over there? Central? Okay. Anyway, so we're central, but nowhere near the expressway, right? No, we do all our stuff on the north side of the expressway. Anyway, we just love it here and have no regrets from getting here. So I, as a master gardener, I became a master gardener as soon as I retired, and because the classes were held during the day, and when I was working, I could only become a master naturalist because their classes were at night. And so I quickly became a master gardener in 2011. And served as president 1 year and did a lot of volunteering with regard to children and scholarships and all kinds of stuff. If you're interested in getting involved in the community, it isn't just playing in the dirt. There's a lot of community interaction as a master gardener, and I'm hoping that you will explore those options and take advantage of those. So anyway, my favorite gardening topic is herbs. I love to cook with herbs because I love to cook and eat. And so herbs are my favorite topic of choice. However, I received advanced training in soils and composting and also in community gardening. So we're going to share some of my expertise with you today with regard to soils. So on Monday, you had a nice presentation by Jason. Kevin's got to help me because at 72, I forget names. So I might remember a first name or a last name, but sometimes never both. Anyway, we're going to continue on with our growing and nourishing healthy communities, but this is going to be the one finding a location for a garden, soils, and composting. So if you're going to be controlling the slides, right, Vince? Or no?
You have to talk really loud.
Vince. Oh, there you go. Okay, so good quality soil is the foundation for good gardening, and it's the source of your water. It supports your plants. It's a source of the nutrients, and it requires the proper amount of both water and fertilizer to keep that plant and its root system and its flowering parts healthy. So just go ahead. Oop, want to go back? There you go. Now, this is one of the things that Jason talked about, didn't he? The components of soil. So 20 to 30% of it is air. Pore space, all right, is important because that allows those things to percolate down and across and feed the roots. You also have your mineral content. You also have your water and your organic parts. So those need to be pretty much in balance in this type of proportions. Okay. There are many different types of soil. What does this type of soil remind you of? Because when you moistened it and you made it into a ball in your hand, it did not fall back apart, did it? So clay is very, very much a sticky substance. Go ahead.
Just want to make sure we're recording. I don't see the little red dot.
You are, it says to click to stop recording. No, it's not.
Red would be stop share, and there's a red button up at the
Yeah,
top that's
sorry.
glowing. Vince, it's real small.
You
Okay.
got to be recording.
You're recording.
Yeah,
Pause
it-
and stop.
yeah, we are. This little red dot right here is showing.
It's recording.
Yeah.
That's stop share. That's not the recording.
To the left.
To
of
the
that,
left of that too.
in the green area.
You are screen.
Look at the finger. Right there.
That's the record button.
There.
Recording on this computer. Okay.
Okay,
All right. Good. And
still
then,
learning.
and then, oh, by the way, that first one that we saw, which was clay, where do we find clay soil in our area?
My backyard.
There might be a few strips of other things,
West
but
of Flower Bluff.
pardon me?
West of Flower Bluff.
Yeah, clay soil, we call it Victoria clay, right? Absolutely. So it extends all across this part of Texas. And then we come with a different type of soil that's common in our area. Where do we find that?
Flower Bluff and Country Island.
My
Right.
backyard.
Yeah, and if you live in the Rockport area, Port Aransas, you know, yes, sir.
I was just gonna say, I hear people all the time saying, well, why in the water here green and blue when they go out to the beach? It's because of the clay content that we have in our soil. That clay makes it in and it stays suspended in the water where sand falls out. So it's not that the water is dirty, I think it's just got clay in it.
And I think because we're here at the coastal bend, we get more wind. I lived in South Padre Island area for many, many years. And I visited 2 weekends ago, and going across the causeway, water looked like I was at the Caribbean. It was just the most wonderful blue. And you get 3 or 4 days like that a year. So sandy soil has its own problems, doesn't it? Yes, it does, because you can't keep water in it. It doesn't have organic matter in it to support the nutritional needs of the plant. And it also doesn't really support the plant itself because it doesn't really have anything hold together. Okay. All right, and then you have loam soils. And you can have combinations of things, clay loam, sandy loam, and a different type of sandy loam down here with different particulate sizes. As you got from Jason's lecture the other day, clay has the largest or the smallest? Smallest, and sand has the largest, exactly. So the best thing to do is to kind of combine the two, right? So that you can get some organic matter in, and you can also transfer nutrients to the roots, and you also have a good support base for your plants, all right? So that's the best of all worlds. Coming from the Midwest as I did, it was a real disappointment soil-wise to come down to Texas, because living outside of Chicago, I had gardens that were just this black, sandy, loamy, not too much sand. And we have this because of the ancient prairie soils in the forests. That loam went maybe 2 or 3 feet deep before you hit either bedrock or clay surface. So boy, was that nice. But as we know here, we've been told that this used to be an inland sea, right? And so that's what remains of that sea. So loam soils are the ones that we are looking to get in our soils here. And that's one reason why, other than landscape plants, we tend to plant our gardens that are in our yards into containers. So we can monitor the drainage and we can monitor what goes into the soil and goes into the plants. Okay. Here's our soil pyramid. Did you see a copy of this the other night?
Yes.
Exactly.
And that is pretty.
You can thank Kevin for finding that slide, because he put these slides together for our community gardening courses. So the clay and separates and silt and separates, when you separate all those guys, okay, you find that your clay particles are the least dense, and your silt and your sands are the heaviest. And so I have here, and you could try this in your own yard. I carry this everywhere, but it's been shaken up a little bit. But at home, what you want to do is take a shovelful or a hand trowel full of soil from your yard. This is one way of doing a type of soil test in your own yard. And add water to it. And what you're going to find out as it settles, any organic matter or large matter, such as mulch or something like that, or woody particles, they're going to stay on the top. And you're going to have a layered effect where you're going to have more of a clear water. And then at the bottom, are you going to have your dissolved solids, which is where your clay is going to land and your sand underneath that. So it's really interesting to do this. So this is one way. And if you have children or grandchildren, I always like to think about these as projects you can do with the kids. This is a fun thing that they can do without a lot of danger, but just get yourself a mason jar or a plastic jar that's clear, and you can do your own little soil test. Okay, sir. All right, many elements in soil. Jason covered this too, didn't he? He covered the big three. What are the big three? Can you name one of the big three elements in soil that we want?
Nitrogen.
Nitrogen, okay. And what's another one?
Potassium.
Potassium. Okay, now there's one more. Who can come up with that other one? Phosphorus. Good. NPK. Now, nitrogen, phosphorus is the P, and the K is your potassium. Yes. So those are your three essential elements, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. But here are 20 other essential elements. We've got our nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, carbon. Those four make up 95% of plant solids. And other than nitrogen and phosphorus, most clay soils have enough of those for vegetable productions. However, because of the nature of our clay soils, can we unlock that nitrogen and use it? No, because it's bound in there because of the high amount of phosphorus we get. In a little bit, Kevin's going to show you the instructions for getting a soil test in your own yard. You get a free soil test that's done at the Texas A&M labs, and you will find out, I'll bet, other than our sandy soil people, that you're going to have nitrogen that's probably in the okay level. Phosphorus will probably be way up, and potassium will probably be somewhere in the normal level. But it's because of all that phosphorus that we have in our soils that it keeps the nitrogen from being available to the plant. But there's other items inside of soil, and it's hard to read this list, but they include iron and calcium, phosphorus and potassium, of course, copper and sulfur, magnesium, manganese, zinc and boron, choline, molybdenum, cobalt, sodium, silicon, and vanadium. So those are all micronutrients that the plants need. Comment?
They're mostly metals also, I mean, basically.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
So they're
Yeah,
positive iron.
yes, there you go. Yeah, those minerals are very important to the production of the plant. And you're right, they cause the molecules to move around so that the plant can absorb those things. Thank you for adding that. If Beth was here in the room, she would have said that too, right, Beth? The importance of nitrogen, okay, here we go. So I'm not sure whether Jason mentioned these, but it's the most limiting element of plant growth. It's the center of the chlorophyll molecule, and it's the major component of cell walls. So you've had your botany already, you've had your soils already, now you're getting a refresh of some of that. Okay. And the importance of phosphorus is it encourages root growth and development and cell division and the development of reproductive structures or fruit. If you grow roses, one of the things that when you use a special rose fertilizer, it'll be a little bit high on phosphorus. Why? That's to encourage the blooms to be big and healthy looking on your roses. Okay, and your development of reproduction of structures and your fruit. And potassium helps with water uptake and retention. It works with starch and protein synthesis. It improves the shelf life of your vegetables and is very soluble and very mobile. So that's one of those things that moves out of the soil very quickly. This is really hard to read. So when you look at this in the VMS later, you'll see that there are different symptoms of disease or nutrient lack in the leaves of your plants. For instance, if things are affecting the top growth, the new growth, if they're misshapen or stunted and existing leaves remain green, it might mean that they need iron. If on old growth, it's a nitrogen deficiency if the leaf is entirely yellowish. It's a potassium deficiency if your leaf veins are dark green and the rest of the leaf is lighter. Carbon dioxide, that white deposit on leaves, stunted growth. Manganese problems, yellow spots. Of course, I see all these holes and I know that they're caterpillars and snails. Are our snails edible?
Anything you're hungry.
They're sneaky devils. You gotta get out. You gotta get out in your garden like before the sun comes up so that you can grab them before they hide in again. Yes, Kevin?
Deb, everything is edible at least once.
Thank you for that sage advice. So manganese deficiency is in the yellow spots and or elongated holes between the veins. A phosphate deficiency is the opposite of your nitrogen because the veins are now yellow, yet the leaf surface itself is green. And then magnesium, the lower leaves turn yellow from the outside going in, and the veins remain green. So yellow to green and green veins. So those are some of the signs of deficiencies of in your plants. Sir. This is something, another thing, if you're taking some notes, you want to try the whole test because one of the things, and if some of you were listening to Michael Womack earlier, one of the things he mentioned about native plants and our environment is look for good drainage. Ensure you have good drainage. And we don't have good drainage in many places, right? We get a rain on our clay soils and all of a sudden we've got glop. And if we don't straighten those footprints out by the time it dries, those are like permanently marked indentations, almost like having a clay surface. After a good rain, you have to wait a couple of days before you can even dig, right? Yes, so one of the keys is after a rain, if you put your shovel in the ground and all this stuff stays on your shovel, is it ready? Should you keep digging? No, wait a day or two. Because then it'll be like a day or two later, you can dig, the ground will be soft. But if you wait any longer than that, you're gonna have to chip away at it with an axe to get through that soil. So the hole test is one way. Another thing that you can do with the kids or grandkids, and you dig a hole 6 to 8 inches wide and about 2 feet deep. And then you fill it halfway with water. Then look at your watch and determine how long it takes for that water to drain. If it's less than 15 minutes, you've got excessive drainage, and you might consider adding organic material to your soil. If it's 15 to 30 minutes, adequate drainage and water holding properties, and so your soil should be more on the balanced side. But if it takes 30 minutes or more, oh, poor drainage. In which case, if you want to make a vegetable garden, you want to be able to grow only in raised beds so that you can offset the lack of drainage. Or you can add coarse soil amendments. Coarse soil amendments could be anything from, not necessarily clay. Where's my rocks? It's an expensive treatment, but there's a product known as expanded shale. It looks a little bit like gravel. But this can, if you have a real hard time with drainage in a particular area, you could probably dig some expanded shale into it. And what that does is it raises the size of the particles. Yeah, see, it looks almost like pea gravel. All right, but what that does is creates the air spaces you need to be able to have adequate drainage.
Does the gypsum break down clay?
Gypsum, we don't really recommend gypsum here for breaking down clay, do we?
It does have that, those capabilities, but because our ICA.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, sir.
Does the shale reduce the pH?
This,
It hardly impacts it.
yeah, because I think it's pretty neutral. So, and it's an expensive option. A better option for you is to add organic matter in the form of maybe your mulching material or composted material. There's a question behind you too. Go ahead.
I was just curious, we have like a month like July where it rained almost every day. And is there any way like to kind of make that into a temporary solution? I know like tomatoes and all of a sudden you get blistered, it's too much water. There's really nothing, I mean, I don't know if there's any kind of solution with that. So.
You can't really after
I mean,
the
I know there
fact.
was a-
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, you can't really after the fact worry about that. And of course, we had wonderful blessed rain this spring, but yeah, things like the tomato plants, if you have them in the ground and they got saturated, yeah.
Nothing to do about that. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Unless you've got a way to create like a French drain type of thing to be able to run that
Well,
off.
I just thought maybe
Yeah.
like going around it or, outside of it, just help with a little bit of aeration and not try to not disturb the roots as much as possible. So around it.
If it's in clay, you can't even get into it.
Why, it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Oh, I've lost more things to bad drainage than I can count. And your question,
Is there a thing that's adding too much compost to a soil?
oh, never. Never. In fact, one of the rules that we ascribe to here is regardless of your soil type, to correct sandy soil, add compost. To correct clay soil, add compost. It's the same answer for both. You can never have too much.
And you plant in direct compost?
Yes, oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, what I've got here is when I make compost, I use a screen, and one side gives me a coarse compost and the other side gives me a more fine grained compost. And I'll use the more fine grained for things that I put in containers. But a good soil recipe uses those, and we have some of that up there. But anyway, this is a good little exercise to do with your family in order to see what your soil does as drainage. Okay, next one, sir. Thank y'all. Hey, Kevin, would you like to talk about soil tests?
Sure.
I can talk about soil tests. So I actually sent Vince a video, but I don't think he's gonna get it up there, so I'll email it to all of you. There's a really good video from Bell County Master Gardeners, and I'll shoot that out to you on Monday with the link, and it actually walks through all of the steps for collecting soil. So when we're soil testing, we're basically trying to get a good idea of what you have and what you don't have. And like Deb was saying, sometimes we've got all the nutrients in the soil, but the pH or other things bind it up and make it where you just can't get to it. So to do a soil test, the easiest way is to get a clean bucket. It can either be like a mop bucket or a 5-gallon bucket. You want to make sure that there hasn't been anything in there that's going to leave any type of residue. If you're not sure, just wash it out with soap and water and dry it. And then you're going to collect anywhere from 10 to 20 samples across the area that you're trying to soil sample. So just think of it kind of like a grid, and you're just going to randomly pick samples out of that. The easiest thing to do, I like a post hole digger, because you can just go and you can get your samples that way. You don't want the organic matter that's on the top of the soil. So you're going to scoop that away and then dig your hole, and then you're going to dump all that soil into the bucket. You're going to continue that, and you're trying to get down. Think about where plant roots grow. I'm taking this off, it won't stay. Think about where your plant roots grow. They're generally growing in the top 12 inches of soil. So try to dig down to about the level of where your soil, where your plant roots are going to be growing, and that's what you're going to sample. Now think about it. If you dig 20 holes, how much soil are you going to have in that bucket by the time you're done? Quite a bit, right? So at that point, you're going to mix all the soil in the bucket together. And you have a handy dandy little bag. And out of that big bucket full of soil, you're going to take just enough to fill this bag about halfway or 3/4 of the way full. And at that point, you still have a big bucket full of soil. What are you going to do with it?
Dump it in the hole.
Go back and fill your holes back up. But that way, you get a good idea of the entire area of what the overall nutritional profile of it is for that whole area. Now, some people choose to do multiple soil tests. Let's say that you've got a vegetable garden and you've got flower beds and you've got the lawn, or you've got other use areas. You may want to divide it into usage areas and do a soil test for each usage area, because it's possible that that area could have different nutrition, different components in it because of the different plants that you've been growing. For example, vegetables tend to take up quite a few nutrients. So in that case, you'll want to do multiple soil tests. Do y'all have any questions about that? When you get that back, you can't see this, but this is what this is actually this form on here. Yes, 2021. There are lots of different types of soil tests. Do we need to do really complex soil testing here? The only people that generally do really complex soil testing are like commercial growers, because their crops are very dependent upon micronutrients. And so they will do, let me pass these out and then I will finish telling you what I'm talking about.
Can we take
I'll go
several?
one side, you go one side.
Can we take several?
We're going to pay for one. I have enough things that you can do as many as you want.
And how many, what does it cost?
It's $12 a sample for the, I'm just going to take one and pass it back.
If we have a front yard and a backyard.
The lawn areas should be the same.
Okay,
You won't have to do a separate one for front and back. Now, some people choose to,
okay.
but you shouldn't have to. I'm also going to tell you that we run an annual soil testing campaign. I don't know if you've seen the kits at like Gills or Turner's or, oh, you did get it. Okay, we're going to watch that in just a second. But we run an annual soil testing campaign. And it's free. The city of Corpus Christi generally pays for it. So they'll pay for one sample also. So in the springtime is when we generally try to do that. And if you want, you can hop by one of those places and pick up one of those kits and do that as well. So another question people ask is, how often should I test my soil? It doesn't change dramatically over a few years' time. So testing it, every 2 to 4 years is generally adequate. You don't have to do it every year, but if the city of Corpus Christi is paying for it and it's free, you might as well do it, right? Okay, everybody got one now? Okay, so if you look down at the bottom, you'll see number 1, it says routine analysis. Everybody see where I'm at? So this is the different soil tests that the lab will do. And the lab is in College Station, by the way. We generally only recommend for homeowners just a routine analysis unless you're having some sort of deficiency. If you're having some sort of deficiency, then you're probably going to want to test for micronutrients. But generally, just getting the profile of what's going on in your yard, the routine analysis is more than adequate. The routine analysis does a really good job of telling you the basic things like your pH level, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. It'll tell you iron and things like that. And it will go ahead and recommend how much of each of these you need or don't need. So anyway, it does a great job, and they're pretty quick. They generally take maybe 2 to 3 weeks to get the results back. So they're not too slow. What I would like to know, I was just going to say, so you can see that the cost goes all the way up to $88. If you wanted something that gave you everything you ever wanted to know about your soil, you could spend $88, but I don't think you need that. You're not going to use that information. The most that you might need is number 2 or number 3, where it talks about micronutrients, and that's only $19. So, but like I said, if you're not having deficiencies or problems like that, you probably don't need that either. We did include a handout that talks about testing your soil and how to do that. Let's see. I don't know if that is.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
If you live near the U.S. ecology plant, they do a lot of injection into the soil. And so the farmland around there,
Mhm.
which one of these would be feasible?
You know where I would start with that? If they do that, they're probably required to keep records.
What do they do?
They're public.
Yeah, that's probably-
Those are public records.
Yeah, 'cause they've already been written up.
So you might start with TCEQ
Okay.
and find out from them where you get those public records for that.
Will they give you a radius of where the injections?
Hold on just a second. Hello? Yes. No, I'm actually teaching a class right now. No. I do not know. I'll call you in a few minutes, okay? All right. You tell people, hey, I have to work in the morning, and they don't listen. Anyway, they don't listen. It's like, yes, sir.
If we're concerned about a certain area and we want the free test to be micronutrients, can we request?
Yes, you can choose. Oh, you mean for the free one?
Yes.
No, we'll pay for the
The
basic,
routine.
but you can do a micronutrient one if you want to pay for it yourself.
How do we select is it that bottom, is it the extension of credit bill or what's?
You're going to, where are you at?
In the payment, do not
I'm
send
gonna
back.
click the $10 one. The next one, the $10.
Oh, you're going, the select only one box, is that where you're at?
Yeah, I didn't know like. How we-
You're just gonna pick the number 1.
No, he's talking about payment.
Payment, don't worry about the payment.
It's free?
It's free for,
So are we gonna drop these off to you?
we're going to discuss it in just a
Oh,
second.
Okay.
I just thought we had to like select something.
No, you don't have to put anything on there.
You
Just
can
fill the
cover it.
top portion out and we'll take care of the rest. All right, since you brought that up, it's easier for me to send these off bulk, all at one time. So if I give you, how much time do I need to give you guys to collect your soil samples? Is 2 weeks enough?
Next Saturday.
All of you can have it by next Saturday? Okay, and that way we can gather them up and I can get them sent off so you guys can get your results back, okay?
Kevin,
Yes.
What about, there are some students, interns here that weren't able to make it. Am I able to take their packets with me?
Sure.
to give them? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And the same for the rest of, if you know people that normally are here but are not, you can either tell them that they can, I could actually email them this information and they could collect their soil in a Ziploc bag. So they don't have to have this bag to make it work. But yes, you can maybe pick up extra ones. Any other questions? All right, well, Vince managed to get the video up, so we're gonna let you guys watch this video and I'm gonna go call this person and see what the heck they need.
Hello, I'm Wayne Sharner from the Bell County Master Gardener Association. Our mission is to assist the Texas A&M Agri-Life Extension Service in providing high-quality, relevant, research-based horticultural education to the citizens of Bell County and the state of Texas. We are working with Belton High School in the production of these videos and would like to thank them for their support. Today, we're going to talk about soil testing. So let's get on with the show.
Hello, my name is Emily O'Brien, and I'm Grace Green, and we are with the Belton FFA. Today, we are going to talk about soil samples and their importance. We will cover the proper way to take a soil sample and what information the soil test report tells you about your garden or landscape. If you wish to be successful in growing any type of plants, be it vegetables, herb gardens, landscape plants, or a lush green lawn, you need to know how well prepared your soil is for the type of plant you wish to grow. That is what a soil sample is designed to tell you. A soil sample should represent a given area of your lawn or garden that has a similar use. For example, your front yard, backyard, planting bed, garden, or others. You may wish to take several samples to get a good representation of the area to be planted. Sample areas separately if you observe distinct differences in slope, soil texture, for example, sandy areas versus clay, or water drainage. You can see the flags that we have placed in the areas to be sampled. If not collected properly, the sample will not be as accurate as you need. So let's see how to take a proper soil sample. First, you should check with your local agricultural agent for a soil test form used in your area. Get the urban and homeowner soil sample information form and get a sample bag from your local AgriLife office. You can download the form from the Texas A&M website. A link for the form will be provided in the description below. You will need a clean bucket or plastic container to collect your sample. Access to a commercial grade or professional sampler will make it very easy to take a proper sample. If not, there are a variety of tools that can be used for taking samples. An ordinary shovel or gardening trowel will suffice. Using a tool, scrape away any non-decomposed plant tissue and materials. The best way to get a clean core is to dig a hole about 6 inches deep in the sample area. Next, cut a core or divot 6 inches from the edge of the hole. You may wish to clean any stones or organic material out of the sample so only the soil is present. Place the first sample in the bucket or plastic container. Repeat the steps as many times as necessary for the lawn or garden area which is being considered for testing. Mix all collected soil thoroughly, removing any roots or other visible plant materials. Then place 2 to 3 cups of soil in your sample bag. You may wish to air dry the soil sample if it feels wet to the touch. On the front of the form is a column marked My Sample ID. This is a personal ID such as front yard lawn or vegetable garden plot. Label the bag with a permanent marker, clearly identifying each bag with the same personal sample ID used on the front side of the form. To mail your sample, complete the information on the form provided for your use and mail it to the address located on your submission form. The report that you get from the soil test lab may differ from the one you see here, but it should contain similar information. Check with your local agricultural agent if you need assistance in understanding the results. One of the first things to look for is the pH value. This is a measure of the acidity or alkalinity of your soil. The next part of the form should show you the availability of nutrients that are required for healthy plant growth. Here's a line showing the critical level, which is the minimum level required by plants. You can see which are sufficient and which are below what is needed. Lastly, you should be given an indication or suggestions of how to correct any nutrient deficiencies that the test has revealed.
Well, that was helpful information. Hopefully you learned a lot about soil testing. If you need more information, feel free to contact the Bell County Master Gardener Association or the Texas A&M Agri-Life County Extension Agent at the information on your screen. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, that was helpful. Think you can do it now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. We're gonna go back and finish the soils presentation. So Vince, give us the next slide. Okay, so an ideal mixture for most of your garden soil is 1 part garden soil and 1 part compost. Here in our area, we have either the option of making your own compost or buying compost from either a big box store or one of our professional garden centers, like Hills or Turner's. So that is basically what you want to try to do. Add that much organic matter or composted matter to your soil, whether it's sand or clay. Go ahead, next one. Okay. Compost itself is a mixture of those organic residues such as leaves, brush, and the like that have been piled and allowed to undergo natural decomposition. And we're going to talk a little bit more about composting. Go ahead. So compost materials are high in organic matter and they're moist. Go ahead. And the material size can be very small, or if you have larger items like sticks or branches and things, you can break them up into smaller things. The smaller the particles, what do you think happens? The faster your compost happens, that's for sure. We are almost always bag our lawn mowing grass, and we have an area that is kind of like a static compost pile in our yard, and that's where all the grass clippings go. If you put grass clippings in a black plastic bag and let them sit for several weeks, the volume of the bag is going to be very, very much reduced after that time. And what you're going to have is a slurry, highly reduced in size. But guess what? You can add this. It comes by the name of a compost tea, but it's not really compost tea. Compost tea is done in another manner under pressure. But you can use this concentrated organic matter and add it to your soil stuff. Mix it with a little bit of water, but this will provide an easy boost of nutrition. Okay, continue. So the materials, I don't even need to go through the next slide with this one. I think I'm just going to stick with this one, okay? So the materials you need for composting are organic matter items. And here's a list of the things that you do want to compost. Food scraps and dead plants, but not diseased plants. All right, if you're fighting off mealy bugs or other kinds of things like spider mites, which are nearly impossible to get rid of if you're doing organic gardening, you want to just bundle those up and put those in your trash. But if they're unfettered by funguses and other insect pests, then you can put them in your compost. Fruit and vegetable wastes. We have at home, we eat a lot of veggies at home. And so anytime we peel something or have a core, it goes in a little bucket like this and goes out to the compost pile. Grass clippings, of course, and cow manure, leaves, yard trimming, tree branches, wood chips, root balls, straw and hay, coffee grounds. I was researching coffee grounds at one time, and you can look this up on the internet yourself. Coffee grounds actually are almost like a mixed, they're equally high in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And they're not hugely infused with those, but they do make a nice little addition to your container plants. Many people like to add coffee grounds to their plants, and they feel that the acidity of the coffee grounds might help certain plants. Did you have a question?
I was just going to say, I've done that before. I've used coffee grounds, but if you go to Starbucks and you let them know that you'd like coffee grounds, they will save bags of it for you to put in your beds or your landscaping, wherever you want it.
That's very, very true. And even the islanders who recycle much of the food waste from A&M over here in Corpus. They get all those coffee grounds as well and add those to their compost pile.
Is there,
Yes,
we
ma'am.
didn't see, we didn't put eggshells in there. So is that one, was that?
Oh, you can use eggshells. Yeah, eggshells is one of the items that I have here. Oh, if you, there you go. Yeah, eggshells. One thing though that I found, because I was doing worm composting once, and if you're adding eggshells, it's a good idea to put them in your in a little food processor and make them more like a powder, because they don't break down very quickly, and the edges are kind of sharp, so you can actually cut yourself on them. And I think I killed my worms by not putting pulverized eggshells. It's gardening's an experiment. You have to deal with failure. Kevin, did you have a
I just
comment?
want to go back to coffee ground. Coffee grounds are great for raising worms.
Ah, yeah. And I even have some worm. I even have some worm, is this worm, worm castings. You can even, if you want to experiment with this, because this is an organic thing that people will add to their container plants as well. They're kind of expensive if you buy them, but this is actually what you're after if you compost with worms. I already sold my worm composter. Yes, sir.
What about like a chicken manure? Sometimes people tell me that it's too acidic and then that's also the.
No, that's one of the best ones that you
I
can
think rabbit-
use. Yeah.
Oh, that's a rabbit. Century.
I'm sorry, what was the second half?
Rabbit.
Rabbit pellet, any manure from any ruminant
Yeah.
or which is a cow, a sheep, a deer, a rabbit, or any other or like birds, guano. Those are just fine. So let's talk about that. So anyway, coffee grounds are on the list here: sawdust, feathers, and other biodegradable materials. But don't compost wheat seeds or wood or charcoal ashes. Barbecue charcoal should not be put in the compost. Some people think that if you add wood ash and stuff to your gardens, that's what phosphorus, right? We don't need to add that to our soil. We have plenty as it is. So there's a person who does radio shows on the public radio. And he sometimes mentions you putting wood ash in some of your things, but in our soils here in town, we do not need to put that kind of stuff in our soils. Do you have an opinion on wood ash?
We just generally don't recommend it.
Yeah, because we don't need it. Anyway, so what else you don't want is meat, okay, or grease and oil, or plastic or metal or glass, because you know those don't break down. Now, if it's got dog or cat waste, any animal that eats meats, that's not going to be a good form of compost. And it's also full of bacteria that we do not want to put into, especially our vegetable gardens. Treated or painted woods, wood preservatives, construction debris, or non-biodegradable materials. So we want to keep them biodegradable. So what that can mean is the eggshells we're talking about, coffee grounds. I even have some coir here, or this is sphagnum moss. I like to use this as a mulch on some of my smaller plants, because when I use sphagnum moss, it's kind of like a mulch for a small pot. That's why you see sphagnum moss on the top of sometimes succulents, right? Pea gravel as well. But it breaks down easily, and it's a good thing to use to top your plants off with. What else did I have there? Eggshells, leaves, bone meal. And we have 2 types of compost here. My kitchen compost, this is what it looks like. And I haven't done, and you can see the eggshell pieces are in here. So this has not been through a screen. And so it has some larger particles in it. That's why I use the screen if I really want a fine soil for a pot that I'm using.
What about fish? When you go fishing and whatever's left over, the fillet and stuff,
I was fixing to comment on that. Right?
what was that?
I was fixing to comment on that. When I lived in East Texas, next to Lake Fork and Lake Walkeny, one of the state park out there had a huge composting facility where they would take all of the remains from the fish cleaning station. Fish compost very well. Just keep in mind, anything that was alive that is rotting like that, but it's an animal, is going to attract flies, it's going to attract, and it's going to have an awful smell while it's composting. So yes, you can compost it as long as you're willing to put up with the side effects.
Well, yeah, well, but if you're like my grandfather who came from the old country, he always, when he planted his garden, especially with corn, he would put a fish underneath that.
The Indians and the Pilgrims did that.
That's right, that's
Remember that
right.
From the 1960s.
The three sisters, exactly. And the vegetable gardening component is going to get more into that than I'm getting into, but absolutely, those practices are very viable. Okay, so water, the best moisture content is 40 to 60%. When you add water, and I was going to do that, but I want to respect your time. When you add water, your compost should feel like a wrung out sponge, okay? It shouldn't be gloppy or drippy, but so if you add water to a compost pile that you're making, you want to make sure that you turn your compost or use a fork to turn it over and just keep it moist, because if you let it dry out, you're depriving all of those beneficial bacteria, fungi, all of those nematodes and other organic critters that are in your compost. And yes, compost attracts critters. And in my compost pile, once I see that there are no more of those outside roaches in the pile, I know it's done. So if you're still getting a little skitter of little brown critters, it's not quite done yet. But once those insects go away, then you know your compost is ready to use.
I have a question. Roaches. Because I grow a lot, I mean, I have a lot of old wood to get roaches and I'll kill them.
Yeah, roaches are one of those double-edged sword animals or critters. We don't like them in the house because they drive us crazy, but they actually are decomposers. They feed only off of dead material. They're not after anything that's alive. So we tolerate them because they actually are helping with the decomposition process outside. But we also understand you don't want them inside. But keep in mind, like I said, they feed off of dead material. So the cleaner you leave everything in the house, the less roaches you're going to have.
And I've heard people comment on roaches being in your compost as a negative thing. It is not. They're just doing their job. Roly-polies. Yeah, all of those critters in there are working hard to break down that organic material. So I know we're really grossed out by them, but look, there are people in other countries that eat them. I mean, go down to Oaxaca and in the market down there, you can get crickets and cockroaches. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, one man's ick is another man's food. So it just doesn't matter. You need aeration in your compost pile. So when you're building a compost pile, there are layers that you want to put in and you want to pack things loosely. I always start with a compost container that has holes in it, almost like a potting thing, but small holes, because you want moisture to drain out. And also, if there are earthworms to be had, they're going to find their way into your pile. So if you've got an open pile that you've got, and some people just use a chicken wire enclosure, and that's an easy one because it's for a small compost pile. It doesn't cost too much to make one, because you can just take a circle of chicken wire, use those little plastic ties, zip ties, and when it's time to turn your compost pile, you simply lift the netting up and move it somewhere else and turn everything over back into it. So it's an easy way for a small compost operation. And especially it's an easy way if you're just starting out and you want to experiment with it. Another nice project for the kids and the grandkids, all right? So those are things that are really good for them. So you want to be able to layer brown matter, which, okay, sticks, green or brown?
Brown.
Brown, okay. Grass clippings. They're brown now. Oh, now brown, yes. They used to be green, all right. And so I let these, here's some real, look at these guys. Yummy. I bet they smell wonderful. This is very moist grass clippings. Oh, you want to smell? It smells like earth. It's just so beautiful. Yeah, it's because of the rains. It gets, so I went to the bottom of the grass pile for these. But see, these are getting to the point where they actually could, become compost soon. And some people like to put grass clippings in their gardens and use them as a mulch. That's fine, but keep them away. If you're using things that are kind of green or not quite composted yet, if you're using things as a mulch, use brown things. If you're using things like grass in the aisles in your garden, keep them away from the roots of your plants, okay? Because if these get into competition with the root uptake of nutrition of your plant, then it's taking away from your plants. So you want to make sure that when you put mulch and compost down, or halfway composted things like this, you want to make sure that they're far enough away from the root systems to allow the plant itself, that was not a bug, to uptake those things, but not enough to compete with them. And grass clippings are a wonderful way to cover the aisles in your garden if you've got a larger garden in between plants. Questions?
Can you talk about the seeds in a compost pile and how they will react with your garden?
Oh, you're talking about if you put like avocado
No,
seeds.
these are grass clippings. They have a bunch of seeds.
Oh, yes, but when it's fully composted, and if you do it really thickly, I've got several years worth of the hardwood or the cedar mulch in my gardens. And what's funny is weed seeds don't really have a chance to take hold. And if they do come out, guess what? They're really easy to pull out because they're growing in that top layer and they haven't really made a dent. So I find weeding in my yard, because I have thick layers of stuff on everything all around my yard, I have a very small problem with weeds.
And how hot does a compost pile get?
A compost pile should get to be about 140 degrees in the middle. Okay, that way you know the organisms are all doing their jobs, and the compost pile is, when it's hot like that, it's great. 140 is the great temperature. You could use some people who are seriously getting into compost will use like a meat thermometer, but a longer one, to test the middle of their pile to make sure it's working. So if your compost pile is starting to cool down, what do you think you would do to
Add water.
if it's too dry, you would add water. If it's too packed, that's right. Give new, because what that means is if it's starting to cool down, you either have too dry a pile or too wet a pile, or that stuff is pretty much done and it's time to turn it and add more organic matter that's fresh to the critters that are in there breaking that down. Did that answer that question? Okay, 140. Be careful. I was going to give you a second composting thing, but because of the time limits, I'm not going to go into that. We'll just stick with this one. On the other one that I have, we went to a place called New Earth outside of San Antonio on the south side. And they have an agreement with the city of San Antonio, which is one of the state's leaders in composting and living green. And they have huge compost piles and huge machinery that goes between the aisles and churns these things up. The piles smoke. It's called hot composting. And you know what? They have to make sure that they're turning these piles, that they don't get too hot because they can start on fire. So that's the opposite problem. Will that be a problem for you? I doubt it because it's very seldom that a home composter's compost pile is even going to reach the 140 degrees because sometimes we're not very vigilant in turning our piles over and checking for air and moisture inside of the piles. So it's not likely that we're going to get that. And weed seeds, because our composting at home is generally of a lower heat, we're not necessarily killing weed seeds. So we still want to be careful.
Or tomato seeds, or squash seeds, or melon seeds.
Yeah, avocado tree, exactly, onions. Yes, ma'am.
Question, on a control burn, when we do it, we use the control burn, and then we get all the material afterwards that we use that. Is that good to do?
It used to be really good because it burned up like the grass burrs and all that kind of stuff, but there's no place that I'm aware of that allows you to do that anymore. So I'm not aware that you can burn off your yard or anything. Probably a question. If I had to guess, in the city of Corpus Christi, it's a big no-no, and they wouldn't allow it.
Outside.
They do allow, if you're on your own property, you're probably advisable to at least talk to your
Welder,
local clear.
Welder Wildlife.
Oh, they do, yes, but that's different because they coordinate that with the county and
Right.
the fire departments, and they have everybody in place to make sure that it doesn't
Yeah,
happen.
it's
So
also, just wondering if you-
you probably just want to touch base with your local fire department and ask them what the local regulations are.
But once we burn, can we switch to use?
Yes, you can put that in there.
Mhm. Yeah, but you're right about the controlled burns, and early Americans and the pioneers knew to burn. To be able to keep down, to grow again and reconstitute organic material and nutrients back into the soil.
It's thought that there were these huge, massive prairie fires that would go across, enormous sections of the Great Plains. Well, yes, it just happened with this part of nature. And every time that occurred, it rejuvenated or replenished the soils and
Naturally.
we've got species now that we are in jeopardy of going extinct because the human impact has stopped those fires from occurring. When we see those types of fires now, there are communities in the way and stuff, and so we rush to try to put out the fires, but in nature, it's a natural process.
And even though it's tragic to refer to some of the big wildfires out west that are happening now, or even, what was it, Bernie? New Braunfels, where they had the pine forest there was lost, but that is part of nature. And unfortunately, our zoning laws and our wanting to make money off of people going off the grid and living in these pristine areas, that's the risk. Yeah, sir.
We said that we didn't want ashes in this type of soil. So how does that fire thing mix? I mean, you're making ashes.
It's just part of, that's natural that way.
Yeah,
Right,
as opposed to barbecue.
Right,
But-
right.
Mhm.
Because that's organic matter that burns, and the other is not.
I see it.
Right, yeah, briquettes are a petroleum product, I believe, so that's, you don't want to put that in your garden for sure. Anyway, the temperature, yes, 140 degrees, we've talked about that, so we're kind of getting ahead of the slides, aren't we? Go ahead, sir, next one. And then the compost, this is just a graph that shows that the optimal temperature is 140. It shows how when things are warming up and then when they're cooling down. Go ahead, next slide. This is one of my favorite slides because it shows the critters, all those icky things that crawl on you, that you don't want them to crawl on you, or that pop out of boxes in your garage. All right, those are things that, well, I had to wipe down everything. You know how many, never mind, I'm not gonna
We
tell you.
were talking about that back here, how We know that cockroaches are good, but every once in a while, you get one of those big ones and you're gonna stare down with it. And it almost always wins, because as soon as you start staring at it, it comes flying at you. You're running for your life trying to get it back from it.
It's a new dance. It'll be on TikTok. Anyway, here's a picture of our macro and microorganisms, okay? Anywhere from earthworms, mites, snails, slugs, cell bugs, millipedes, fly and fly larvae, flatworms. After the rain, I saw a flatworm climbing up my back door. And I tried to pick it off, but it came off apart in segments. Yeah, and I put it in the freezer, but I was gonna bring it in, because there's some very bad worms out there that are invasive, and I wanted to make sure I didn't have an invasive. But I love the shape of flatworms. I went early biology class, you know, when they had those little, planaria. They were so cool. Anyway, gardeners tend to be weird people, don't we? Pardon me? Speak to for myself, right? Beetles of all kinds, ants, okay? And the centipedes and all that stuff. And then you've got your organic debris here, and you've got your bacterias, your fungi, worms, beetles, springtails, actinomycetes, all right? Everything from the micro level to the macro level is in there, things we don't see, but they're all working very hard to decompose this stuff. This is what gives them purpose. So we have to compost to give them a job.
But like you said, wear a mask, right? Like for the actinomycetes, they're very small and you could be allergic to them, so if it gets very dry, so.
Yeah, so keep your pile nice and moist so it works quickly. Yes, sir.
One of the things that concerns me is that I saw in the previous slide that it says you gotta turn it every 3 to 4 days.
No,
And
you
I
know
was
what?
thinking about once a month would be fine for me, because I don't have that kind of time.
That's a good point to bring up, because that's where I fail in my compost too. They say, and in my other presentation, it said, turn your pile every 10 days. Well, who's going to remember every 10 days? If you want to be one of those people that has a set schedule and have a nice regimen, why don't you just do it as part of the day you cut the lawn, or once a week? Set something that it's easier. If you have a chore day, that's the one time to do it, right? It doesn't take a long time, does it? No, especially since most of us who have like our compost in some type of a container, it's a small one, and it's real easy to turn that bin if we have a turning one, or to dump that over and repile it again. If you've got a large country property or a larger property, and it's not against code to have a large open type of composting area, which you can do that out in the country, right? And so that's kind of, you can't really turn that. But after a longer period of time, you can dig down into the bottom and pull out the composted material, which is really neat.
And that's for optimal composting, right? These companies that produce it on a schedule, they have it every number of days that they run the whatever through it, and they turn it and do everything. So that's if you want to produce compost and you want to be on the how quickly can I make compost. Those are those recommendations. But no, you can wait as long as you want to turn your pile.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Is there any
Go ahead.
depth? Is there like a certain depth that you can't go, or does it matter at all?
It depends on what you're composting. The depth of my grass clippings is only, I guess about 6 inches, and it just keeps shrinking as the grass decomposes.
But is there any, like, say about if you want to do a 6 foot deep large, like you're talking about in a large area, like do a 6 foot deep compost, huge compost area, does that affect it at all?
Actually, there is and I'm going to share that with you.
You can make as big a compost pile as you want.
Yes,
Just keep in mind, the bigger the pile, the harder it is to turn.
yes. One of the, and you can get this, and I'll give you a copy since you're a teacher. And also this would make a wonderful class project. When we went for our composting thing, our class built one of these 3-bin composting things. And it requires some lumber, some labor, and some chicken wire. And we built this in just a matter of a couple of hours, but it's a 3-bin turner. So what you're doing is it's a larger pile. The recommended maximum 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. Okay, so that's a direct answer to your question. And I bet you want to do this with your kiddos.
I've used 3 plastic trash cans before, side by side like that. And just put some holes in the bottom of them so that you've got drainage.
Yeah, what,
Pretty cheap, pretty easy.
if you moved to Corpus Christi like we did and had your own garbage bin, you're probably using that in the garage somewhere, or maybe have an extra. Put some holes in the bottom. I did that as well. And so that's a good way of doing that. So I'm going to leave a couple of copies. And since you said you're a teacher, I bet you want this. Sure. Yeah, there's one for you. And this is from the University of Arkansas. Thank you, pallets. Absolutely. You don't, yeah.
Work really good. And then you put the chicken wire on the inside and leave the front where you take the front off so you can take the screw front back on. So
Yeah, and we used some furring strips so that we could pull the slats out of the front of the one that we master gardeners, half of them not here anymore, but we made a compost bin of that type over at Ray High School. If you have a chance to get over to Ray High School as you're doing some of your volunteering activities, you can take a look at the raised bed situation, and you can also take a look at the composting types of compost bins that are there. This is my favorite because brown plus green in the presence of water and air and micro and macro nutrients create compost. Next slide, please. Okay, so methods of composting, trench composting. Some people like to, if they have their garden in the soil, they will dig trenches, and every other trench they dig deeper and they put compost in there and they fill it up, and it also is a way of walking on it. That's why shredded newspaper is kind of a good thing. And then they plant their items on the plants on the top part, and as those roots grow, they access the compost below, and then they alternate those. You can see an example of that over at the south at the San Antonio Botanical Gardens, where that's one of the things that they do. Okay, triple and single bins, mass basket composting, and tumblers. Let's go. I think the slides are going to show us. There we go. So here's a difference about trench composting. You dig it about 18 inches deep. You place your vegetable material in there, coffee grounds. Okay. All right, next one. Here's that triple bin and the instructions for building one. Okay, go ahead. And a single bin, and this is where the pallets come into use. And you can basically put them together with those plastic zip ties. You know, you do not need a bunch of money to create a composting container. Okay, go ahead. This is the one I was talking about at the beginning. Just get a little bit of rabbit wire or chicken wire. And I like rabbit wire better because chicken wire has really, they're sharp edges. So rabbit wire is a better thing to use. And simply, you can take pieces of rebar if you have them. You can take pieces of molding, you know, the quarter round molding. If everybody has scraps of that in their garage, if they've got a garage, and you can use those as stakes to put them in. And then you simply lift up the bin and turn it over and repile everything into it. And then basket composting, this is kind of cool. And this reminds me of, there's a form of composting that they build around bricks. Kevin, what's that one called? Keyhole gardening. Yes, right. And that you'll probably hear about more in the gardening class. But take a look at this. You can put your compost in this bin in the center, and as the things break down, what's happening to the nutrients? They're filtering into the root systems of your plants. So that's lazy gardening stuff. Okay, go ahead. Tumbler, and this is just a 55-gallon drum that has been modified. It's open in the middle, and this person built a frame and can just tumble it that way. Every once in a while, the Aransas Pass Master Gardeners and the Extension Office over there will give a thing on making rain barrels and also making composting. And that's a good project for a class to do too. Oh my, we're coming up with all kinds of great projects for you to do.
Dave, you can normally buy those barrels or they'll give them to you at any of these places that paint cars and stuff. When they're done with those barrels full of paint, they'll usually clean them out and they'll give those away free most of the time.
If they're clean, because
Yeah.
generally we'll limit ourselves to barrels that have only had vegetative matter in them,
Yeah.
because chemicals are really hard
Yeah.
to get out. That's for sure. You know, one mulching material or composting material I haven't met. We're not going to use that slide or that compost. But one of the materials that that you can buy locally, and it's also a product of our agriculture practices, is cotton burr compost. People sometimes ask questions about whether the spraying materials and the boll weevil control actually makes the compost poisonous, but it is not. It's vegetable safe, and it's a really good type of material to add to your compost. Yes, ma'am.
Do you compost here at the botanical garden?
Thank you for asking that question, because what I was going to do before I end my presentation was I was going to say, you are going to have, now, we've pretty much run out of time, but if you have some extra time after we finish our administrative stuff here, walk over to the earth kind beds through the fence, and you'll see composting bins over there. And if you have the opportunity, come to the composting presentation that Melissa Zamora, who is with the Islanders at Tamu Corpus Christi, she's setting up programs here, and she's just a whiz at composting. She's the person, she and her team have developed the composting program that Texas A&M Corpus Christi uses. And so she's also setting that program up here. And if we had more time from the beginning, I would say let's walk over there and discuss and talk about the different compost bins that they have. But please either camp in or come to Melissa's presentation in a few weeks. It's a Saturday presentation like Mr. Womack's was, or Dr. Womack's was.